Ladies and gentlemen, good day, and welcome to the Growthpoint FY16 pre-close conference call hosted by Macquarie. All participants will be in a listen-only mode. There will be an opportunity for you to ask questions at the end of today's presentation. We will first take questions from the room and then from the conference call. If you need assistance during the conference, please signal an operator by pressing star then 0. Please note that this call is being recorded. I would now like to turn the conference over to Nazim of Macquarie. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Eric. Just like to thank Growthpoint for giving us the opportunity for a pre-close update prior to the FY16 results, represented by the CEO, Norbert Sasse, as well as Lauren Turner from IR. Norbert's just going to give us a brief update, followed by questions from the room. We'd also like to let the guys know that there are people in the room here today, as well as people on the conference call. Go for it, Norbert.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for attending, and for those that are on the call, thanks very much for your time. The purpose of this pre-close call is just to give you a bit of an update before we head into sort of the financial year in close. So in essence, I guess the information that I'll be talking about is from 9 months to the sort of end of March. I'll start off briefly just talking a bit to some of the strategy. On the strategy side, I know there's a lot of talk obviously in the market, and there's a lot of action in the market with companies moving offshore, looking at international opportunities, expanding their non-rand, let's say, earning space. I think we as Growthpoint, continue to evaluate opportunities across Europe. I think it's fair to say as well that, and it's probably common knowledge now, I understand, I've got some feedback from some of the guys who went on the redefined tour to Poland recently, that we have been there ourselves. I think, with all the noise and all the hype about Eastern Europe and things from Eastern Europe, it was probably appropriate for us to also just go and have a look, given that I personally have never been to Poland, I've never been to Romania, any of those jurisdictions. So in sort of deciding which of those jurisdictions to have a look at, we started off by asking ourselves and asking some of the major international investment banks, which of those markets are what we call institutional markets. Where can you get institutional grade properties? Where have you got an institutional, let's say, deep market, liquid market, where you can actually trade properties? And I think the short answer was that there are probably only about 3 or 4 countries, and within that it's actually 3 or 4 cities rather than 3 or countries per se. Poland, I think, would have been the standout in that region. I'd say the other one was Romania, and Bucharest in particular. Comment was made about Czechoslovakia, Prague, and then lastly Budapest, I think, in Hungary. So that would have been the broad outline of which markets are seen as institutional. Given the limited time we had, we only visited 2 of those markets. We visited Poland, and we visited Romania, or let's say Warsaw rather, and Bucharest. And yeah, I'd say, on balance, I was probably positively surprised in terms of what I saw. It seems that Poland is much more westernized than I probably had thought, with Bucharest running pretty hard second, or not a hard second, a pretty distant second. I think it's fair to say that it's very evident the lack of infrastructure in Bucharest relative to Poland or relative to Warsaw. But if you look at the underlying asset opportunity, bricks and mortar, and the quality of the bricks and mortar that is available there, it was probably quite impressive. Even in Bucharest, I think it was quite impressive. So clearly, it remains interesting, if you want, on an opportunity, given the yield spreads that are on offer. I think the overall assessment was that certainly, if you look at cap rates had compressed quite dramatically in those markets, in particular in Poland and Warsaw. Cap rates there are probably as low as they've been, or certainly as low as they were at the time of the financial crisis. The 2 key differences in my mind is that I think gearing levels are not nearly as high. Clearly, interest rates are much cheaper, giving a sort of a broader positive yield spread. And then on the positive side as well, probably rentals are not as full as they were in these 07, 08, 09, let's say, super cycle before the financial crisis. But, similarly, I think in Bucharest, very similar dynamics, with the exception, though, at yields they are probably not quite as low as they were. You still get the yields are certainly 150 to 200 basis points wider in Bucharest than compared to Warsaw. So on the face of it, it looks pretty interesting. The big question mark always, I guess, will be growth. Where can you get growth? Can you get growth in rentals? I think one of the telling features, or one of the telling comments that I heard from one of the professionals that we saw when we were in Poland, literally was the last word that came out of the guy's mouth as we got in a taxi to move on, was that you're coming here and you're doing your financial modeling on the opportunity. Don't assume any capital completion, and don't assume any rental growth. And then you're saying, cool. Those are two key assumptions, and what are you really doing there? Okay, then are you just looking at the yield spread and trying to lock in that yield spread for as long as possible, and possibly then converting some of the banking on some rand weakness? So look, we haven't quite found what we're looking for. We continue to look. There's no guarantee it will be in that region. We continue to look more broadly across Europe. It's one of those classic things, you sort of see, the right sort of opportunity when you find it. We continue to look. I think, just to finish off on the offshore angle, obviously we do have an existing offshore business in the Australian business. In fact, Estienne and I were there last week for the board meeting cycle. I personally, or I think maybe we more sort of as a collective at Growthpoint, I do still like the Australian dynamics. I think if you look at the positive yield spread that you can obtain in Australia relative to what you can obtain in Central Eastern Europe, we believe that given how institutional that market is, given the liquidity of that market, given the international appetite for property in Australia, on a risk-adjusted basis, in my mind, you're probably getting better value in Australia. Anybody escalation. So, look, Aussie is also, on the rental side, it's fair to say you're not seeing huge rental growth. You're seeing some rental growth certainly in Sydney, New South Wales, and Victoria, in Melbourne area, but to a lesser extent, certainly in the Brisbane area. And Perth is a bit of a basket case at the moment, and very, very tough with vacancies, going over 20% in that particular market. Rentals are coming down 50 and 40% in certain instances in Perth. But it's a classic, sort of bubble scenario that emerged in Perth. Rentals were over $1,000 a square meter. Some of those leases are now coming up in at $600 and $650 a square meter, which is still high compared to the kind of stuff we're getting on the South Bank, of Brisbane. We're at the $525, $575 level. Some of the other stuff we're looking at, more recently, we're in the $360 to $420 range. So even at the 600, it's still expensive, for a market such as Perth. So we still very much like the Aussie dynamic. We've got a great team in Aussie. We've got a management team there. We've got 7-8 years experience of the market ourselves. We know the way things work there. And as I say, on a risk-adjusted basis, you might not quite get the same level of initial yield spread, but you do have the escalations. And no doubt that it's a much more stable market than what you might find in Central Eastern Europe, especially, notwithstanding the commodities, let's say, cycle that Australia obviously is exposed to, similar to South Africa. We do get a sense that probably, certainly when we were in Brisbane on Friday, you get a sense that the commodity issue, or the commodity side, has sort of bottomed out a bit. That, the commodity prices have found a floor. maybe a little bit more stability, maybe see some increases off the current levels, which obviously will be positive.
Can you talk about the transaction next? All these countries.
Yes, so I'll talk to that very briefly. So you would have seen, I think, that Garden made an offer fairly recently for a small listed fund there called the GMF, the GPT Metropolitan Office Fund. It's got about $450 million worth of assets. There's only 6 property assets in that fund. Four of them are in Sydney, in the Sydney Olympic Park area. One of them is in Brisbane and one of them is in Melbourne. We had actually progressed in negotiations with the board. That once we put our offer in, the board's elected an independent board that was going to evaluate the offer, and we had actually signed an agreement with them which gave us exclusivity, and in terms of which they agreed that they would actually recommend our offer to shareholders and call a scheme meeting. So we decided to go the scheme route. Literally, before, a couple of days before, I guess we could move towards signing an implementation agreement, a scheme implementation agreement with the board. An unknown entity to us, certainly Centuria, came out of the woodwork and announced that they had bought 16% of the shares in GMF. Now immediately we obviously try to understand who and what Centuria are, and it turns out that they've got 2 listed entities. One is actually a fund manager. They've got $1.8 billion of funds under management. They've got a bond fund. They've got this listed property company called CMA, Centuria Metropolitan REIT, which is the only listed fund that they manage. And then they've got unlisted property assets that they manage as well, collectively about $1.8 billion. The market cap of CNI, which is the manager, is about $85 million, so quite small. Their fund, the listed property fund, CMA, owns about 13 properties across Australia, about $380 million worth of assets, market cap's about 250, 260, and they announced then that they bought these shares and that they were also going to approach the board. They then were going to also announce they were going to come forward with an offer. Everybody expected, certainly we expected that their offer, they bought these other shares for cash, that they were going to come with a cash offer at about the $2.40 level, which is what they paid for the 16% stake. Turns out they put an offer on the table which was about 11% cash and 89% shares in their small unlisted fund. So not quite as compelling as I think the market might have expected, and certainly if we compare it, we try and be objective as we can, obviously comparing a Growthpoint to their bid, our offer was 50% cash, 50% GOZ shares. We believe certainly on the face of it that our offer is superior to what's on the table there. But we've had to change tactics in that now a scheme's not going to work. You need 75% vote for the scheme, or 16%. You normally have 20% of shareholders don't pitch, so it's probably a blocking state with their 16. So we are looking at different strategies at the moment in terms of which we can convert our offer, which was in the form of a scheme, into potentially an offer for the shares. So it's going to be a bit of a competitive process with these guys, and we think that we're not going to. It's not at all costs. We think there's value, there's good properties there, and we'll take it one step at a time. But I think that is indicative, I guess, of the competitive framework within the Australian market. It's not easy to grow there, but we do think that there are definitely still opportunities there to grow the business accretively.
So property assets you buy, are you expecting to spend anything on those, or?
Not really, no. The ones in the no. Those are. Two of the properties in the Sydney Olympic Park area are single-tenant triple net leases with a WALE of about 8 years. One is a crowd called Lion, which is a global drinks, alcoholic and non-alcoholic beverage distribution company, and the other one is Samsung. So then the other 2 buildings in the Olympic Park is more multi-tenanted, offices. And at the there we churn there, but there's very little capital to be actually spent.
Is the price Are you willing to shift on the price, or is it just a mix between share and cash?
Sure. Be careful what I say here. Obviously, what gets said here feeds its way back to Australia quite quickly. But we're gonna just watch. We think we got room to move. We'll have to see how the opportunity plays out. So yeah, I mean it's obviously very fluid and vague, but I can't really talk too much about just how the tactics that we use. I think we've also just, it has been an article that found its way into the press about another asset in Melbourne that we're buying. We as guys have not announced it yet, because we haven't actually signed the definitive sale and purchase agreement, but there is an asset just outside the Melbourne CBD, about 24,000 square metre office, with a weighted average lease of about 5.5 years. ANZ and Mondelez, the principal tenants, and BMW Australia, as a major tenant there. And that's a $166 million acquisition, and we should announce that in the next couple of days.
Has the acquisition of the 16% stake by them taken place prior to you starting the discussions and negotiations?
Post. No. We were well advanced in terms of our discussions. We were in DD. We were 2 weeks into our DD when these guys came out of we were given a 4-week DD. In fact, our DD, I say exclusivity. We had exclusivity in inverted commas until this coming Friday the 2nd. But that DD, when I say it's exclusive, on the basis that you have to put yourself in the shoes of the independent board, gave us exclusive DD pending or provided no other competing offer was put on the table. And there was a debate on whether it is a superior offer or not. Now, on one metric alone, which is, let's say, the value of their offer, you take the ratio. I think they had a ratio of one CMA share for one GMF share plus 27 cents in cash or something like that, and that comes to about $2.43. Our offer, which is 50% cash, 50% shares, came at about $2.41, $2.42. So on that metric alone, it looks like maybe their offer is actually superior. They're certainly very close. But you have to go and look at their shares, and with 90% of what you're getting is that share, which is highly illiquid. There's no question the quality is not even remotely comparable to ours. So there are many other things that I think the board should take into account in evaluating the two offers. But for now, the board, the independent guys, are probably just more interested in saying, well, we've got the competition here. Our job is to try and get the best deal for shareholders, the best price for shareholders.
They clearly got
I mean, to the DD as well.
They clearly must have got a block of stock. Because that's the reason I was asking is whether they're sort of accumulating, and then they cross the threshold where they've got a little.
No, they bought it in 2 blocks, I think 12 point. Funny enough, they bought the shares in the 2 different entities. So the manager has bought 12%, and the property fund has bought 3-odd percent. Collectively, they're 16.1. But they definitely did buy them blocks from, obviously 1 or 2 institutional shareholders.
So all this, are they already debt funded? All the transactions, the Melbourne transaction and this one?
So
cash portion of it?
Correct. So I mean, we do have the capacity to debt fund it. Certainly the Melbourne transaction. I think just depending on the final outcome of the bid for CMA, for GMF, depending on the final outcome of that, what stake we end up with or not, will depend how much cash we've had to utilize and whether we need to potentially raise cash in GOZ or not. We are also looking at a disposal. We've got a $150 million portfolio of industrial assets in the market at the moment that we are looking to sell. So obviously, if we get that cash in, that would minimize the requirement for raise.
And the funding costs? You're mostly familiar with quite a good funding.
Sure. So I mean, we currently have got about $240 million of facilities that are undrawn. Where we're already paying the line fee. So the way it works in Australia is you've got The margin is broken up into two components. There's a line fee, which is like a fee you pay for having the facility pre-approved, and then there's another half of that is called a true margin. And we're really paying the line fee, or basically, the line fee. So our incremental cost of drawing down debt is about 3%. New debt is probably in the order of about just over 3.5%.
Longer term debt.
That's probably, the other debt was a bit more expensive on the basis that was a 7-year. The most recent one was a 7-year bond issue. The one prior to that was a 10-year bond issue. The 10-year came in, I think, at 4.75, and the 7-year at 4.5, something like that. So that's obviously quite long-term funding. You can get 5-year funding there at between 3.25 and 3.5. So just to move on, I think from Aussie, just trying to see from our notes here whether there's anything else in Aussie that's specifically relevant. I think just in summary, looking at this year, what we had budgeted, probably I think GOZ is on track to deliver its stated distribution targets and EPS. We've probably done a little bit better on the hedging than what we had budgeted, and one of the key unknowns to do is still probably what is the final withholding tax percentage of the final dividend. I think the half-year dividend was probably a little bit better as well in our favour, where I think the withholding was about 51 versus we had budgeted 54, something in that range. Moving then off the, let's call it, international story and the GOZ story, back to the domestic situation, and maybe initially just a bit more broadly and then more specific to the three sectors. Clearly on a macro level, I can't be telling you here that things are all rosy. I think there are many headwinds. There are many headwinds in the market. We're continuously, evaluating the portfolio and assessing, which assets to sell, which assets to expand, which assets to, so looking at optimizing the portfolio. In the period, I think we've made a few acquisitions, but they've only really been strategic type acquisitions, i.e., to improve an existing asset that we might have, so I think it was a property adjacent to something, or in order to facilitate a better answer on some of the asset management strategies on one or two of the properties. We've probably got about 30 properties that we've sold in the period, or in the process of selling by 30 June. I think we would have sold something like 30-odd properties.
Those properties, are you getting good values, like close to NAV, or
yeah, absolutely. No. So I think it's at or about the book values. But yields are uppish. Yields are definitely sort of up in the 9s, but reflective of book value. Again, if you look at historical cost of capex, and we do IRRs and look at what do we actually achieve, still getting significant profits on historical cost of capex, but pretty much in line with book value.
Is that much in the office sector?
Mainly office and industrial. Yeah. I think I mentioned this at the last results presentation. Cape Town does seem to be a bit of a market on its own. It's sort of not necessarily reflective of what's happening in the rest of the country. So the Cape Town dynamics are still reasonably strong. Everything's pretty firm. Rental growth is still available. Vacancies are low. So all things considered, Cape Town's still pretty good. I think as an overall message, there is a slight trend with arrears having increased. Again, we do see quite big, let's say, swings from month to month. You guys only normally see numbers at December and at June. And, so if I compare the March number to what we would traditionally see as a June number, the March number is a bit elevated. I know that our collection guys go beyond the call of duty to collect as much as they can for the reporting date. So we do, to hope that number will come down again to more numbers that we are sort of accustomed to. It's fair to say that there is generally a bit of pressure in terms of arrears. Some tenants are paying a little bit later. Some tenants are doing part payments. It's obviously indicative just of how tough it is out there in the market.
If you had to categorize those types of arrears, which sort of sectors or types of tenants?
Difficult for me to give you that answer. I mean, it's fair to say that, retail is actually, bumped up, quite a bit. But I wouldn't be able to, within the three sectors, I think, if you know, Lauren, I think it's, the biggest, let's say, weakening that I've seen. I don't want to overstress this. It's not like we've seen a massive deterioration, but it's probably more weighted to retail than the other two sectors. I think vacancies in retail and offices remain pretty consistent with what we announced at the half year. And on the industrial side, we have seen a bit of weakness. So there have been one or two largish, the dynamic, typical with industrial is, you get a 20,000 box or a 40,000 box and it goes vacant. It's not like it's a half vacant or anything, so you get quite dramatic movements. So we have seen the industrial one move up a bit. Across the portfolio, we're still seeing 7 to 8% average escalation. So when we're signing new leases, we're still getting the 7 to 8% escalation rates. The renewal success rate, as well as the weighted average renewal growth rate across the portfolio, is still very consistent with what we reported at half year. We haven't seen a dramatic deterioration or improvement in those trends. So overall, I think the story is reasonably consistent at this time, when compared to the story we told at the half year. Vacancies are reasonably stable, cost under control. Property net income is under pressure, and you really see that sort of manifest itself in what it's costing you to retain your tenants. So to keep the tenants in situ is definitely costing you, having to give rent concessions, having to give, take a bit of a knock on rentals, and then, just the absolute level of churn. I think the other thing you have to understand is if you look at, obviously, our retention ratios at the half year for the portfolio as a whole was 64.4%, right? That means for vacancies to remain stable, we have to do a lot of new lets. Just to put that into perspective, we are 69. Yeah, 69 at the half year. Yeah, for vacancies to remain stable in the overall context, that means you have to do a lot of new letting. And just to put that into perspective, again, for the 9 months, we've actually done 465,000 square meters of new lets. That's just an indication of the size of the portfolio and the magnitude of it at the moment. A little specific then onto retail. I think we all guys will probably know better than us even, or me personally, what's happening to the consumer, pressure that the consumer is under. I think the SA Consumer Credit Index put out by TransUnion for the first quarter 16 came out at 46 points, and down from the comparable quarter in 15 at 54 points.
I mean, actually, when you look at retailers, the sales numbers aren't disastrous at all. I mean, these numbers just come out. The prices, numbers. Today, via sign-off, the PEP. But they don't look. So when you mentioned that retail, is that more like specialized, not the big, the sort of retailers that you've seen pressure? Because I think if people tell you in enough times that things are tough, and we obviously realize it's not a rosy picture out there, but still, the actual what's being achieved is not bad. I mean, it's not like shit, but things.
Sure. My comment is really, specific to the consumer, and obviously they're the ones who are driving the retail sales at the SA retailers. Obviously, many of these retailers have now expanded offshore as well, but I'm presuming you're talking specifically to their
Yeah, no, obviously, anyway, it seems like that really, I think that they said in their documentation, when they refinanced this, when they delayed this financing, that they were down 5%, I think, net, if you take credit and cash into account. But the other guys are still growing. I mean...
So, certainly one thing which, we're seeing is just the impact of the retail sales might be, still it's not disastrous. There's still some growth there. But if you transpose that onto the fact that so much new space is being added into the market, clearly as it affects us, we see our trading densities not growing at the same rate if you want that to, these guys. And if you analyze those numbers, I think you'll also see that, the trading densities that the guys are achieving in the newer centres are not quite matching the trading densities that they achieve in the older, more traditional.
Would you say you're seeing trading densities actually falling?
We're seeing trading densities not falling, but not growing, certainly not growing at the rate at which our escalations are kicking in on our leases. So escalations might be at 7 and 8, trading densities are growing at 4 and 5. So net that translates to increased cost or margin pressure for the retailer, increased cost to income ratios, which ultimately limits our ability to pass on rental escalations or rental increases when the leases come up for renewal. So I think, again, our portfolio is probably to an extent defensive, in that it's fair to say that we're still seeing a dynamic where the centres serving the middle and higher income groups are performing better than those centres serving the lower income groups. Clearly, in the overall scheme of things, the real pressure on the consumer is in the lower market segment. Our vacancies and renewal success and renewal growth rates for the half year are very consistent with the half year in the retail space. I think we're seeing the supply issue is still being very pronounced, and I actually asked Stefan to do me a little schedule here. I've got a little schedule in front of me. I'm not going to need all the detail, but I've listed 28 of our 50-odd centres here that have either been impacted in the last 3 years by new centres, opening up in its immediate sort of catchment area, or have got planned new shopping centres which will compete in the next 12 months. So 28 of the 50 odd have either directly been impacted or will in the next 12 months be impacted by new competition, which I think is really pronounced and obviously talks to in my personal opinion, the excessive supply of new retail into the retail space. Laura and I were at a conference at the beginning of the year where many of the retailers were present, and there was a number of international investors who were questioning the retailers and they're coming to talk to us. And there was a very strong message that we got via the investors and analysts that the message from the retailers was that they just cannot afford not to be in the new shopping centres. We find that quite difficult to come to terms with, and we probably need to think about our own strategies in that regard. And I've spoken to Stefan about this, and my personal view on it is that if they cannot afford not to be in new centres, then surely to goodness they also cannot afford not to remain in existing centres. So maybe we can be a little bit more aggressive, in our negotiations on the rentals, because if it is all about just defending their market share, they're definitely not going to be wanting to move out of your centre if you're asking for another, 5 or 10% increase in your rental. But you can't apply that unilaterally. Depending on which centre, it is. Some centres might be a bit weaker than others. But I do think that, if that is the message that they're getting, then maybe we should be sending them a message the other way as well. They say, well, if that's the case, then you probably also want to remain in existing ones.
But it's not going to make a difference to a national, because if you're going to take him up on one centre, he's going to bring you down on your weaker centre.
Again, so that is, unfortunately the portfolio effect. So there's always, if you're going to, be aggressive with me on this particular one, then I'm going to have to be aggressive with you on the next one, where perhaps we're not, it's quite on as strong a footing as as we might want to be. So, but it remains probably the single biggest challenge. I think there are two major challenges in the retail space. The consumer story, interest rates rising is generally, more weakness in the consumer story. But secondly, the continuous supply of new product onto the market.
And just across the portfolio, rental levels, absolute term. Is it relative to market? Is it in line with market, slightly behind market?
No, I'd say it's pretty much, at or about market. I mean, if we disclose our average growth rentals.
Are you concerned
with the three sectors?
So is there any possibility you believe it might be overrated?
There is, and I'll get to the office sector maybe. Not necessarily in retail so much. I think retail is pretty consistent, pretty stable. And again, retail, there probably isn't a market rental for retail. The market rental for retail is a factor of how they trade in the centre. So you can get, 200 rand a square metre from Edgar's, let's say, in one particular store, and you can get 120 in another store. It's all relative to how well they trade in that particular store. So retail, I'd say, is an exception. With regards to industrial and office, I think there might be one node in the office sector that we probably are a bit above market. But I'd say for industrial, I think our number for industrial is something like 54 rand a square metre average growth across the portfolio. That is not above market in terms of in my view. So just to finish retail quickly though. I think the only last point I want to make, or two maybe last points, is there is definitely anecdotal evidence that the trading in the new centres is not nearly as good as I don't know, some information that's been put out into the market leads one to really ask a number of questions. We talk to the retailers all the time, and certainly the information we get on the new centres and the level of trading there, it's definitely a lot weaker than the older, more established centres. In PE, I think there's always a question around Bay West. What impact has Bay West had on our PE centres? I think Bay West has now been trading for about 11 months. At the bridge, we've seen turnover slightly down. I haven't got numbers here in terms of percentages, but certainly the major impact has been felt in the cinemas at the bridge. At Greenacres, also turnover is a bit down. But Greenacres is a bit complicated because we've been doing some work there and some redevelopment, so you're not quite sure how much of the lower turnovers is due to the impact of the redevelopment versus the coming on stream of Bay West.
Can I have one off-the-cuff question? Because I'm got to do with Bay West. Would you pay the price for Bay West that Reporter is willing to pay for Bay West?
I have to confess I haven't looked at the detail. I saw numbers. There was one which was over 30,000 a metre. There was one at 29,000 a metre. There was one at 28,000 a metre. I don't know which is which between that and Forest Hill and whatever that is.
What's your...
It will all depend on the trading densities. If they're doing the kind of trading densities that they suggest they're doing, at 2,500 a metre or something, average trading densities. In this market, I think the short answer is no. I wouldn't be paying anywhere near those prices. But I haven't had the opportunity to really look through all the detailed information, and we would be really sceptical on those trading densities. I think the last one is Warmer Park. Warmer Park has definitely been impacted as well, mainly over December and January. So given the holiday trade, I think Bay West being a new product, its closer proximity to Jeffreys Bay and St. Francis, and also the fact that it's got an entertainment offering, which is in the form of the ice rink, etc., etc. We saw December and January impacted negatively at Warmer. But if you look back into January, February, March, in fact, it looks like our turnovers have actually grown in Warmer. So negatively impacted over that holiday period, but not really negatively impacted beyond. We're getting growth. We're not getting the kind of growth that we were getting, but at least we're not going backwards. Edcon, we've given you guys all the detail on Edcon and what our exposure is. If anything, we are cautiously optimistic that there might be some solutions to Edcon which will be positive for the landlords, which might come to, might be some announcements in the next couple of weeks on Edcon. The office side, office is, and remains the most difficult of the lot. Business confidence index, I guess, is obviously at almost a 6-year low. The vacancies, renewal success and renewal growth remain consistent with the half-year story, but there's probably a bit of downside risk. So it's not, so we're certainly not seeing things improving. If anything, things are probably neutral and maybe a little bit weaker.
I talk about 65%, the renewal success rate.
Oh, success rate, yeah.
Are you doing enough to keep your tenants in, or are they closing down, scaling down?
Yeah, you do whatever you can do, but sometimes there's just nothing to do. Guys are consolidating. The trend is no different. Lots of consolidation, lots of cost cutting, lots of optimization of space. Going open plan and all these sorts of dynamics. Certainly no net demand at all. More competitive than it's ever been. There's no doubt that if you look at the number of players in the market, the number of REITs that are out there all competing and vying for the same tenants, it's never been as competitive as it is at this particular point in time. I think our Smart Move campaign that we've introduced on some of our more problematic buildings has definitely been successful. We had a building in the Rivonia area that was pretty much entirely vacant, and we've actually filled up the entire building on the Smart Move campaign. But it's clearly coming at a cost, so you're having to incentivize the tenants to move, into their premises by offering rent-free, by offering increased TI, and offering even an allowance to assist them on their move.
Are you getting longer leases and 8% escalations on that?
Yeah. So I wouldn't say longer leases. You're getting, obviously we're trying to incentivize to make it to go long. So for a 5-year lease, you can get effectively 1 year rent-free. For a 3-year lease, you're only getting sort of 3 to 6 months rent-free equivalent. So the incentivization is there to go long. So we are having some success with 5-year leases. And yes, you do get your 8% escalation. But obviously the starting rental is in a very weak market, and on top of that, we're having to give the incentive. The themes, I spoke earlier about consolidation, it's demand. We've seen, I think you asked earlier about where we're seeing some over-renting perhaps, and where we've got some challenges. It's fair to say that the Woodmead, Woodlands, Harrow-Dean area is an area that we are seeing some pressure at. Funny enough, not necessarily, there's no rush to Waterfall or any new product in Waterfall. The major tenants that we've recently seen move out of the park have moved to Greenstone and Greenstone Node. One of the tenants has actually moved out of Harrow-Dean, but taken about a third of the space in Woodlands. So we've kept them as a tenant, but they've given back basically 2/3 of the space that they were occupying. So that area is definitely, under a bit of pressure there at the moment. We've got big exposure there. Certainly something from an asset management perspective we are focusing on a lot. On the development side, I think the major development in Cape Town in partnership with Ravi, Beach Park development down in Cape Town in Century City, is now fully let to ABSA. They've taken the full 18,000 square meters there, so that's a good result. We still see, the competitive advantage, our leading position in a green office space. The fact that we, I guess, have got the biggest portfolio of green-rated office buildings in terms of energy efficiency, etc. We do see that as a continuing focus area of ourselves to differentiate some of the space that we offer relative to some of what the competition offers. I think it is a trend that will build and will feed on itself, and will become more important to tenants in their seeking for office space in future. More of these sort of green features are going to be more prominent going forward. On the industrial side, again, I think the leading indicators on the industrial are all negative. Low business confidence levels, motor car sales down at levels last seen in 2012. The manufacturing output remains low. We're also still seeing, even in the industrial space, consolidation into smaller space, and everybody's obviously looking to cut on the costs. Vacancies, as I mentioned, we have seen a slight increase in the vacancy. The renewal success rate is, funny enough, increasing slightly in the industrial space, but the renewal growth rate is again flat or very consistent with what we announced in the half-year update. We haven't been successful in finding a long-term lease for the Ellerins warehouses, as well as the one Midas property that we've got, which is a big vacancy. I think the Ellerins warehouse, the one has been vacant for a full year, and the other one we are currently looking at disposing. Imminently, we're going to be transferring that imminently. That is the old Redwoods space in Johannesburg. That's a 16,500 square meter warehouse. We've had one or two liquidations, and then we also recently, as a solution to one 47,000 square meter warehouse going vacant, entered into a transaction, a complicated transaction whereby we managed to secure a tenant for the 47,000 square meters. They were consolidating. In the process, we actually had to buy two of their existing premises, which had significant vacancies, obviously, as they moved out and into the other one. So we net didn't gain as much as we, would like to have gained. We've actually managed to fill the 47,000, but we've actually gone and acquired, if you want, a vacancy of about 25. On the development front, the sweet spot for us is in that 10,000 square meter sort of space. We've done really successful developments in Cape Town, in the Greenfields area, as well as in Midrand Central area. And then we obviously have got a focus on the Sandrand area, where we purchased some of that land from the Cavaleros Group. And we're going to be doing some two small spec developments in that area, just about 6,000 square meters of industrial. So we've been very successful in actually specking industrial in the Midrand area. By the time we're sort of halfway through the build, we find a tenant for the entire property, and we start the next one. We've actually done 5 of those now, and we will have let all 5 on exactly that basis. You start spec, you let whilst you're building, you will start the next one, you let whilst you're building. So that's been quite successful in the Midrand area. Just conscious of time, waterfront, if we move off the SA portfolio and then maybe just focus on the V&A, I think the V&A continues to perform exceptionally well. I think the season seems to have extended, so normally the season would end around about March, but the season has run well into April, even into May. Equally, the season would only normally start again in about November, but I think, certainly in the last year or so, we see the sort of season start even earlier. You're seeing the season start in about September. So waterfront continues to do well. Very low vacancies, obviously strong with boosted by tourism. On the retail front, I think the January, February, March, we saw turnovers up 30%, including obviously some expansion with H&M and Hamleys. So if you strip out that, it's probably like 24%. It has slowed down a little bit now, obviously as we're coming out of the season, going into April, and clearly it's not feasible to continue to grow at 30%. The base keeps rising, and you can't just continue to grow 30% off that higher base every year. We've seen trading densities, because of those dynamics, obviously we've seen the trading densities grow very nicely, and should, whatever leases are coming up for renewal there, will be on a strong footing there to be able to push for some better rental growth. On the commercial side, there's very little vacancy in the waterfront. In fact, there's a shortage there of A-grade space. More recently, we've actually signed up in the new Canal District space, which is where British American Tobacco are going. We've also now secured Ernst & Young. Ernst & Young are going in there for 4,000 square meters. That's also been the catalyst for the development of the second building in that precinct, which is now called the Canal District.
The box size, is that still optimal or leading edge?
Look, they're about 4,500 there, I think. So I think they would have wanted more if we were able to give them more, but the reality is we just don't have any further space, any additional space to give them there. And I mean, yeah, they were trading, I think, something like 8,000 rand a square meter trading densities. It's fair to say that those numbers will come under pressure as and when they open up new stores. Initially it was just Waterfront and Sandton City. I think they've committed to Greenstone?
Mall of Africa.
Mall of Africa as well. Yeah. So equally in Cape Town, eventually I'm sure they'll end up at Canal Walk, and they'll probably end up at Cavendish. So even at half those trading densities, we'll still be very happy, and we'll be receiving much better rental than our original feasibility. On the residential side, we've seen some good letting at the Breakwater residential developments. That is almost fully let. The Fort's Edge is a little bit more problematic, but we've changed the manager there, and we're hoping to see improved letting at Fort's Edge. The hotel's performing particularly well. So, turnover rent from the hotels has definitely come back, and we're earning some good turnover rent from the hotel operators at the moment. On the development front, quite a few developments coming on stream before the end of the calendar year. But the Zeiss Smoker, that museum should finish in December. The Virgin Active Gym, that's imminent. PwC and Worksmans and British American Tobacco, they'll all become income producing before the end of December. And then into 2017, we've got the Silo residential apartments. I think the transfer of those units are from March, April next year. Those are 66% pre-sold. The Radisson Red Hotel, I think it's a little bit later in 2017. And then Ernst & Young would also be probably about June, July 17.
What kind of access for the waterfront?
So it's a process. It's an ongoing process and discussions with Portnet and Transnet. So we did win that tender for the cruise liner terminal, and part of the strategy for us there to at least be in the game on that particular tender was to have access to that part of the port. Now, that part of the port does have a separate road, the Duncan Road extension, and we continue to engage with both Portnet and Transnet as well as the city in terms of hopefully gaining access through that road as well. We are currently still looking at options and solutions for the Amway building. We bought that Amway building from the PIC. There's a bit of work to be done on that to try and just come up with an optimal solution for that building. Obviously quite strategically located right at the entrance to the waterfront. We're still looking at a solution for Woolworths. Woolworths are very keen to also drop down into the basement, similar to what we did for Pick n Pay, and expand their food offering quite significantly. The challenge there is by dropping them into the basement, we lose a number of parking bays, and we have to find parking bays elsewhere. So we're just in the final throes of finding a solution for that.
Does all get better rental by going into parking bay?
Yes. Yeah. Well, look, I mean, we're into a complete new lease with them, obviously, on that new space that we create for them downstairs.
Is it just going to be full downstairs? Are they going to keep the fashion?
Yes. So they're currently over 2 levels, so they'll effectively be over 3 levels. So they'll keep their existing footprint, drop the food into the basement, and do the clothing and home and all that sort of stuff on the other levels.
And all levels have the same rental, or are you split?
No. Look, we'll be doing this will be based on our feasibility. So depending what our costs are, we're going to be wanting at least 9.5-10% yield on whatever we spend there. So we are obviously also very aware of we saw these announcements. There was an article today, I think if I'm not mistaken, on Woolworths in the last week or so, on how well they've done in expanding their food business. I must say the one thing that is really impacting us is that lease structure of theirs. it just does not work for us anymore. I mean, we have not seen rental growth out of Worth in the last 5 years at all, because it's all turnover based, and they just keep opening more stores, and we end up getting absolutely no rental growth.
So they're getting cheap rent on for the fashion.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we'll see what we end up negotiating with the waterfront. So we did have a bit of a strategic session at the waterfront a couple of weeks ago. Of the 220,000, what did we sell? The 220,000 odd of bulk that we had, if we take into account all the developments that we've committed so far, we would have about 130,000 square meters of bulk remaining of the 220 that we started with. There are plans afoot to apply for some additional bulk, and we looked at pretty much a 10-year sort of strategic plan for the further rollout of whatever the bulk is that we've got at the waterfront, together with any new bulk that we can acquire. And part of that strategy could potentially involve a solution to some of the traffic issues. The city needs a solution to its traffic problems. We could potentially, play a role in that, in the form of funding, on the basis that in return we get additional bulk. So that's potentially quite exciting. I think the funding requires a capital-hungry baby, that waterfront. So the current free cash flow that is generated by the waterfront, which is in the order of 850 odd million, is plowed straight back into development. So we're not actually getting real divvies out of the waterfront. We're having to constantly obviously fund the expansion of that asset. And then last couple of minutes just on treasury, if I may. So what's happening in the debt markets? Been very active in the debt markets. Clearly, the cost of debt continues to rise. Interest rates and prime potentially still set to rise even further. Our benchmark 5-year cost of money today is in the order of 10.3%. Margin is for 5-year money is about 180, and the swap is about 50. We had a good result with Moody's recently in their repositioning and recalibration of their national scale ratings. They have given us a AAA rating. We're only one of 2 corporates in the country that have got a AAA rating. It's ourselves and FNB. And on the international scale rating, they have reaffirmed us at Baa2 with a negative outlook, which is in line with the sovereign. We can't obviously pierce the sovereign ceiling unless we can demonstrate that we're sort of delinked from the SA economy and the SA macro. So i.e. probably our earnings would have to be more than 50% or even 60% foreign. Only in that particular instance can you sort of pierce the sovereign ceiling, so we're nowhere near that. We raised about 1.2 billion from the DRIP in April, just over 50% participation. In the last month or so, we did issue 2 corporate bonds, which was quite encouraging that the bond market was receptive. We issued 265 million rand worth of 3-year notes at 155 basis points. In fact, that came in below our guidance. We gave guidance for 3-year at 160 to 170, if I'm not mistaken. We came in below the lower end of guidance, which we were very encouraged by. Equally, on the 5-year bond, we should see 27 million in the 5-year space, and that came in at 178, where our guidance was 180 to 190. So again, just 2 bits below the lower end of guidance. So we were very chuffed by that outcome. And there was decent liquidity there. The total bids were 2.2 billion. We have, since the beginning of the year, restructured 3.8 billion rand worth of debt with existing and new facilities. The commercial paper, we issued 3-month CP last week at 400 million at 45 bips, which was at the same level. 45 bips was the same price we had paid on the previous issue. At the end of March, our weighted average cost of debt is still 9%. But including our cross-currency interest rate swaps, the actual interest rate drops to about 8.6%. We do have over 5.6 billion rand worth of committed facilities at the end of March, and we're at about 86.5% hedged. On the swap front, Our total cross-currency interest rate swaps amount to about 235 million Aussie dollars. We entered into that this financial year, which obviously lowered our average cost of debt, and 40% of the cost of our Aussie investment has now been effectively funded through cross-currency interest rate swaps. The targeted weighted average maturity for the fixed interest rate profile of 3 to 3.5 years for June 2016. And then just in closing, maybe a comment quickly on the Africa Fund. The team are currently still on the road, on the formal roadshow. You may be familiar with the fact that we have committed $50 million ourselves to this fund. We have got the IFC, we have committed $40 million to the fund. We're looking to raise a minimum of about $250 million, and the team are out on the road at the moment with a formal hard capital raise program, looking to do a first close at the end of September. All indications are that, notwithstanding that it's a very hard sell at this particular moment, given the challenges and given the liquidity issues, especially given the weak oil price, the dynamics in Nigeria and even in Mozambique closer to home, are that there's very few dollars in circulation, and landlords or any business for that matter finding it very difficult to get their dollars out of those countries. So I think from a timing perspective, we remain optimistic that we'd rather be going in now in the next 6 months or in the next 9 months than having possibly gone in maybe 6 or 12 or 18, 24 months ago. We're still pretty optimistic, that we get the fund off the ground, and we're obviously going to be very selective where we invest and what we invest in, and I think we should know pretty much all the pitfalls at this particular juncture, so we're going to go into those markets eyes wide open. I think that's pretty much it. I don't know if I think the idea was that there'd be questions around the table. They've been ongoing. It's quite interactive.
I think it's to Harry, are there any questions from the call?
Thanks. If I can just give a reminder to the parties on the call, if you'd like to ask a question, please press star then 1. To ask a question from the telephone conference, please press star then 1. Our first question is from Michael Flingler of Oasis. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, Norbert. Just coming back to the start of your presentation, I just wanted to understand if you're investing offshore to mitigate risk of your current emerging market exposure, and would you not actually be increasing your risk if you're going into secondary European markets so late in the cycle? Because in those secondary markets, especially if liquidity is low, isn't there a lot of downside risk if the cycle actually turns?
Yeah, I think, Michael, no doubt that would be the case, and it's very interesting. We've been trying to obviously analyze this situation for many months. Now, if you're sitting in Western Europe and in London and in Frankfurt, Paris, wherever, there's no doubt that looking at Eastern Europe, Central and Eastern Europe, is seen as a downward trade. It's more high risk. It's more from all perspectives, it's a negative trade, if you want. So the guys in Western Europe take a very dim view, if you want, of Central and Eastern Europe. When you're sitting here, though, and you're sitting in the midst of an emerging market, which is actually one of the weakest performing emerging markets, and you start looking at Central and Eastern Europe, I'd say it's probably not a negative trade. Probably a neutral trade, and it might even be seen as a slightly positive trade if you've got confidence in the fact that ultimately there will be some liquidity in those markets. Those markets are emerging; they're developing quite quickly. Their legislation is starting to emerge. They are not all 100% euro-based. Obviously, many of them are in the euro, so you get the legal protection of being in the euro, but you don't quite have the currency. They've still got their own currencies, the zloty or whatever these things are. So, Michael, it is, it's diversification out of one emerging market into maybe two emerging markets which might have different characteristics. I'd also say that as difficult as growth is to come by in Europe, our assessment is that there is slightly better growth in the Central European, Eastern European markets, given the exceptionally low base that I guess they're coming from. So it's an interesting one, Michael. I think I don't know if I answered that correctly. We are trying to understand it, and that would be sort of some of the anecdotal evidence or views that that we would hold. I would still be nervous of the fact that at these kind of cap rates, it's as expensive, I guess, as it's ever been. The only counter to that, and if you try to draw a comparison to what happened in the financial crisis, is that in the financial crisis you had rentals at all-time record highs, you had gearing levels at all-time record highs. In fact, guys were doing dilutive deals, one or another. When they were buying at sixes, their cost of debt was actually probably at least at the same sort of level. There certainly wasn't a positive yield spread of 3% there. So, it is slightly different this time around. I'm not saying it's a slam dunk by any stretch of imagination, but I do think that it's on a relative basis to investing in a super cycle in the financial crisis. You might find that the yields are equally low, but these other factors are probably giving you a little bit more protection. If you're starting off with a 3% positive yield spread, you can absorb a bit of a shock either on your rental or on interest rates moving up. And then you just hope that obviously, if and when you want to dispose of the assets, that, there is liquidity in that market, which I think is going to evolve over the next sort of 5 to 10 years. The REIT legislation in these markets doesn't really exist. But all these markets are trying to do the right thing. They are trying to get their house in order, in terms of their own debt to GDP ratios, in terms of so that they can ultimately get into the euro on a full basis, for want of a better description, including the currency. So there is there's still risk on the currency thing, but most of those currencies are sort of pegged, albeit not formally, to the euro. So there is an element of more hard currency going into those markets relative to the rand.
But how big enough is this market or competitive as well, given that you've got 5, 6 South African funds playing that space, and now there's trend-based properties coming up tomorrow as well?
No, it's very competitive. I mean, we get a sense as well that there's a different kind of capital. The capital that is in these markets at the moment is all private equity capital. And that's 5-year time horizon. So every 5 years, these guys have to liquidate. They have to sell. They have to wind up their funds or try and extend for a year or two, and ultimately then sell. So the kind of capital I think that the South African REIT type market is bringing appears to be, certainly appears to them, to be more long-term capital, more capital that can, sit through a cycle. It won't be forced to sell in a down cycle. So therefore, liquidity per se is not as important as it might be if you're in a private equity fund and I have to liquidate within a given time frame. So, the kind of capital can sort of see through a particular cycle and hopefully wait for an improvement. But I think, Kieran, it's very competitive. It sounds actually quite bizarre that, South African funds need to go compete with one another in these markets. But it seems to be what's happening at the moment. And it's not only competitive from the let's sort of competition now coming from the investor side. What you have to understand is very competitive at a developer level. So in-country developers like an Echo and these kind of guys are very aggressive in developing new product, in competing with other developers, but also ultimately will be competing with for tenants and for users with the guys who are coming in and currently buying the existing stock.
We have another question from the telephone audience from Alistair Anderson of Business Day. Please go ahead.
Hi, Norbert. I just wanted to ask, because obviously it's quite difficult to find suitable assets abroad. Is there a possibility that you would instead take over a South African fund that has significant offshore exposure maybe is inwardly listed, because I suppose there are quite a few well-priced funds like that, as opposed to funds that are maybe only operating in SA.
Yeah. I think good question is, we always look at all options and opportunities. So, if there is an inwardly listed fund here at the moment that's got some offshore assets that are looking particularly interesting or appealing or well priced, we could definitely have a look at that. We're certainly not doing so at the moment, but we certainly wouldn't be precluded from looking at those kinds of opportunities. Any other questions on the call?
There are no further questions from the telephone audience.
Anything around the table?
Just quickly on the offshore side, would you look or attempt a participation along with another SA company that's expanding offshore?
Again, I think we'll evaluate, any and all opportunities. We wouldn't be setting out, to find an opportunity that we would JV with somebody. I think, we've always held a view that, we want to paddle our own canoe. We always, and we struggle with this from time to time, is our requirement for control, as opposed to, some other guys have taken minority stakes in companies, and some have done particularly well, some have done maybe not done that well. But we've always felt that, we're not just passive investors into anybody's fund. We believe there's value that we could bring and value that we can add, if nothing else, from interest in, especially when you start looking at these Eastern European markets. These Eastern European markets are, at a property level, are quite sophisticated, but at a corporate level, from a governance perspective, from access to debt capital markets, access to equity capital markets, are very unsophisticated. So our argument would certainly be that we're not just coming in and bringing money, we're bringing value at the same time. We saw some fund managers in the UK that said, they looked at these Eastern European companies and we asked them, how do they compare that to the South African, let's say, play? And interestingly enough, they said, from a South African perspective, they're very negative on the political and the macro. But at a corporate level, they think the management teams are excellent and got great, great experience and credibility and transparency and experience in capital markets, etc. In the Central Eastern European markets, they saw that they're much more comfortable, funny enough, on the political spectrum and environment in those countries. But the management teams, they didn't have the experience, the expertise in the corporate world, if you want. So the one guy made the comment, he said, if you can take a CE company with good assets and good, let's say, pipeline, and you could, what was the word he used? He said, if you could give it an Anglo-Saxon management flavor, it would be something that they would be very readily invested to, because the management teams there don't have the credibility, they don't have the transparency, they don't have the governance. So if you could bring that together with opening up access to debt capital markets, equity capital markets, that could be a very interesting play for them. So that's ultimately the kind of thing we're looking to unlock, and we don't think that we need to tag on to another South African fund, let's say, to sort of bring that.
Okay. Just like to thank everybody attending and listening, and again, a final thank you to Norbert and the team. All right.